Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss how the government's attempts to promote the privatisation of healthcare services keeps failing badly, and yet we're still moving in a direction that means privatising more of our NHS. The latest example is in the chaos of private, almost completely regulated PCR testing for people returning to the UK, or returning to England more specifically, from abroad. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So as part of the government's coronavirus measures, people returning to England have to take COVID tests if they're to avoid periods of isolation. Fairly standard, a lot of countries doing this. And it even applies if they've travelled to countries on the so-called green list, if it's countries that are relatively safe parts of the world. It is all relative. You know, these are the PCR tests. They're not the lateral flow random audit type tests. These tests require laboratory analysis, can take a day or two. They're also provided in this country by private companies. You go onto the government website, and then it takes you to the private company to get the test from. And they're not coping, and it's very expensive. Now, when it comes to the use of private companies in healthcare around the world, you look at different situations, you can essentially lump it into one of three types, can't you? You can say, do you know what? Our own public healthcare system should do this, so we'll invest in that instead. That's my preference, because there's actually a number of reasons, without going over all of them. The main one is that all of what would have been profit goes back into the public's pocket, goes back to the Treasury, or towards further investment to make future services better. Second one, all right, you're insisting on private healthcare. Right, so you could have a strongly regulated private sector involved in your healthcare, like in Germany. You know, some countries use this, sort of works. You get the healthcare. I mean, that's the important thing. You do actually get the healthcare when you need it without being terribly badly ripped off. But then finally, you could encourage the private sector to involve itself more fully, even sweetening the deal with public money being given to them and not regulating their quality or their prices. This is largely the situation in the United States, of course. Guess which one is our model? If you didn't know, you could guess by the latest rip-off in the form of these PCR COVID tests for people returning to England from abroad. Saw a report saying that Italy have a cap on the price of these tests, which is the equivalent of £52. Even better in Greece, £34. They're free in France. Don't pay a bean. In fact, France is the better comparison. Similar population size, same part of the world, roughly the same level of wealth, even similar in terms of COVID impact. You know, very, very similar country. In terms of COVID, they've got more cases. Well, they've had more cases than we have, but we've got more deaths. So we've handled it more badly. But it's pretty bad for both of us, let's be honest. Basically, if you don't need to pay for these PCR tests in France, why do you in England? And whenever it comes to public funding with the Conservatives, they always go, well, of course, we would love to. But we just can't afford it. I mean, there's no magic money trees. Well, how come others can do more than us then? Do you think it's because you keep giving all our money to your wealthy mates? Is that the reason? And there have been reports of people paying hundreds of pounds for these PCR kits here. It's a minimum of £50. That's not actually terrible. £50 is not too bad. You know, if you're going abroad anyway and you're thinking about the cost of going abroad and going on holiday, okay, it's not great. If it's like a family of four, that's potentially like 200 quid when you get back. I suppose depending on, you know, ages and everything. But still, you know, if you're going abroad anyway, you're spending a bit of money. It's not terrible. If it was £50, it really shouldn't be anything. But if you're having to pay £200 for one test or more, you have a serious problem of policy. The new Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has been pressured into responding to this. He's been told, you need to cap these prices and you need to remove VAT to make them more affordable. His response has been to ask the competition watchdog, the Competition and Markets Authority, have a look at it, will you? We know what that means. Stall for a few more weeks while demand for these tests is high, to make sure those companies can maximise their gouging profits, and then when it calms down, review the political situation. If they still think it's an issue, people are still aggrieved by it, cap the price. And I said, we've capped the price now. Yeah. And demand will be less anyway. So the price would naturally have come down. Because that's what's happening here. The price of these is so varied because the companies can get away with it. Ordinarily in a market, you can't have one company offering a product for £200, another one for £50. The one selling it for £200 would never sell it. The companies are charging more because the industry can't keep up. The reports of people not being able to get their PCR tests sorted out. You're supposed to have it within the first couple of days, like day 2 when you get back. Then you get the test results the next day. This is not happening for some people. Like a week it's taken them, to get the results. The private companies being used cannot cope with the very predictable level of demand. And when I say predictable, I mean we knew loads of people would be travelling out and back into the country this summer. It's summer. It's what people do. And we knew they were going to be allowed to do it. In fact, as fewer are doing it than normal, getting ready for the demand should have been relatively manageable. But they can't cope. And that's where privatisation should never be anywhere near healthcare. A private company doesn't worry about not being able to keep up with demand. All it wants to do is get demand up to their supply. In this idea of supply and demand, in an idealised world, of course, they would just match. But that's not how it works in the real world. So for a private company, they want demand to exceed their supply. Because that's fantastic, because if that happens, you sell all of your products, less waste, no waste really, more profit. Fantastic. And that's fine for a luxury item. It is annoying for the frustrated punter who wants their item but couldn't get it because, they were selling 200 and you were the 201st customer or something. But when it's a a vital public service like healthcare, that priority is on its head. With an essential service like healthcare, you have to make sure you can meet demand. You can't say, sorry, we can only do 500 hip replacements this month. You're the 501st. Oh, sorry, you have to wait now. You can never reliably always meet demand. That never happens. So what you have to do for a service is to make sure that your supply exceeds demand. That's what you need. But a private company doesn't want its supply to exceed the demand because that's wasteful. It means the stuff it's not making money on. Smaller profit. This is why if you do use private companies, you have to have a tight rein on their obligations. They have to be carefully regulated to make sure that they will provide the service that you need of them. There cannot ever be, sorry, demand went up a bit, we didn't expect it. No, no, you have a bit extra. Better still have the entire thing nationalised. What grieves me is we can see the Conservatives accelerating their plans to privatise the NHS. It's been going for a bit. Regulated at first, then those regulations loosened, then removed altogether. At the moment, they're in the phase of trying to convince us that the NHS is still a public body, when quite a lot of it is now privatised already, and it just uses private companies to save money. Behave yourself. How do you save money by paying large profits to people that just run the staff that you could have employed to do the same things you could have got them to do? But anyway, the trick is to deny the NHS the funding it needs. You need to force the NHS to fail. So the government get to claim that the public funding model has failed and we need to move to the US private healthcare model. The best healthcare in the world. And they're increasingly doing this openly, talking up the US model. But the plan has a small flaw in that people like me will go, well, hang on a minute, they haven't been funding the NHS properly. Even a blinkered population can see if you've been reducing funding to the NHS, that's where your funding problem is, not the model. The fact you haven't been giving them the money. So you need to make it look like you've absolutely been pumping loads of money into the system, flooding the place, but it's just going to waste. So you do that. You pump billions in. But you force the NHS to funnel it into private companies. You force them. You say to them, no, you can't provide these services. You have to get private companies to compete for it. You can decide which private company gets it based on these criteria, but you're not having the money. You've got to give the money to them instead. So you use the NHS as a sort of funnel for the money. So that not only is the value of the service you're getting lower, because a lot of that money is going straight into profit for a small group of Tory donors, investors, but the actual amount of money being spent by the NHS in-house It's difficult to discern because it's mixed up in the official statistics with the money that went to private companies. It takes people a long time to do the maths on it, so we don't get the information up to date. The latest reorganisation of the NHS in England is already set for a big payday for private companies. They're hammering this idea that we need more privatisation. And yet they're undermining their own argument. Test and Trace with Serco and others could have been managed by the NHS, should have been managed by the NHS. The NHS managed the vaccine rollout, did that well. Only let down by insufficient supplies from the privatised sourcing group. But Test and Trace was not managed by the NHS and so was a spectacular and very expensive failure. Actually, it was in two bits. There was some Test and Trace happened in the NHS. That worked, but it was a very small part of it. It was the largely privatised part that was failing badly. On the quiet, the job is now being passed out to public authorities. The government have basically admitted defeat. Dido Harding is soon to be out of a job, and the whole thing has been taken off the private companies who have recorded massive profits for their failure. But hardly anyone knows about this. Hardly anyone. All done on the quiet. The Department for Health and Social Care could have procured all the PPE we needed. They would have been a huge customer. Could have got great discounts. And also knowledgeable enough to know where to get the stuff from. Instead, contracts were given to mates and donors, some of whom, yes, knew where to get them from. Otherwise, we'd have got no PPE. But quite a lot of them had no idea what they were doing. It was the same thing, and it was literally the same thing as if they'd have given me 200 million quid to buy some operating gowns. All they did is all what I would do and go onto the internet and try and go, can you give me 150 million quid's worth of this stuff, because I want to pocket the other 50 million for myself. That's what happened. We spent a fortune on what was frequently unusable equipment. That's if it ever arrived. This pandemic should have refired the argument for a fully public NHS. Point to me anything that's happened during the pandemic, a COVID service that was provided by private companies, 100% of the time, I'll show you how it's been not just a failure, not just not as efficient if we'd have done it in-house, but a spectacular waste and failure. Point to me to the very small number of services that were provided in-house, and I will show you where 100% of the time it worked smoothly. It should be impossible to accept the arguments for privatisation of healthcare now. They should have completely shot themselves in the foot. Even without the obvious argument that a business works by making sure that demand exceeds supply and that a public service needs a supply that exceeds demand. It's theoretically impossible to have an effective privatised public service unless you legislate to force that private company to act against its own best interests. And yet here we are, headed towards a fully privatised healthcare system, completely unregulated. This latest PCR test gouging is just the latest example of what should be waking more people up and is failing to do so. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.